Hey everyone, happy early morning here on a Wednesday. A lot of times we do webinars on Tuesday, but Wednesday morning here. This is a TopSoil podcast, TopSoil webinar, and so excited to have my favorite local congresswoman here with us today. Dr. Mariannette Miller-Meeks is with us. So awesome to have this discussion, dig in on an array of different topics, and just have some kind of candid conversation here too for everyone that's attending. Obviously, we want you to be able to get your questions answered as well. We're mostly going to be, of course, talking about ag and biofuels and 45Z and some of that kind of stuff. So, obviously, we want to keep it on topic as much as we can, but lots to dig into just in those kind of categories. Even though I'm sure I know there's a lot of different stuff that you're involved in, Congresswoman, and you can hit on as much different stuff as you want, but uh, for the most part, we got a lot of different stuff to talk on, and
Yeah.
a couple of our favorite topics. Number one, obviously, I want to really thank you for spending the time. This is an amazing honor to be able to get to host you here this morning, and really just have some conversation and let everyone else have some too, and let others observe the conversation afterwards on YouTube and such. So. But anyway, without further ado, why don't let me get things just tossed over to you. Introduce yourself. There's some folks that aren't necessarily from Iowa, so maybe not everyone knows all of your background and some of your story, but tell us a little bit about that first, and then we'll dig in and go from there.
All right. Well, Mitchell, thank you so much. And first and foremost, thank you for inviting me. I think we met maybe 3 or 4 years ago,
Yeah.
and I think it was after I had read about you in a Wall Street Journal article, of all things. But was just super impressed, one, by your energy, your youthfulness, your embrace of something that I don't think a lot, we get kind of set in our ways and doing things the way that we do, but your embrace of sustainable regenerative ag.
Mm.
And as a state senator, I was elected to the state senate in 2018. So I served in the state senate 2019, 2020, and then ran for Congress. And in a Democrat district, so it's a rural district, but I actually don't have a rural background, even though I grew up in rural areas. So you told me to tell you that, but first I'm complimenting you. So is this
Uh,
introduction to you as I started looking at what we did. I'm a Republican congresswoman, and just looking at my children and then going to my nephew's
mm.
elementary and middle school as the token female veteran. They were in the East Coast, and that's very important to them. And they didn't have a lot of female veterans. So every year I would get invited for their Veterans Day ceremony, which was wonderful that they did it. But they would always invite me, even personally, rather than through my sister, because I was a female veteran. And there are just not a lot of female veterans,
Yeah.
especially in our age group. And so I would see all of this environment, climate stuff. Some of it I thought was very factual. Some of it I thought was embellished. And I just began to think, if Republicans don't start talking about climate and the environment, we really are hurting ourselves and missing out on an opportunity to engage with people. And I especially saw that in our agricultural committee or our agricultural community, where laws and regulation was being made and it was impacting farmers, often in a negative way. When from my interaction with farmers and having lived in mostly rural areas, we really want to protect the earth. We want to protect water. We want clean water. We want better soil. We don't want to deplete the soil in the 1930s depression. Farmers and conservatives and Republicans, they're interested in habitat. We're hunters, we're fishers. We want, wildlife habitat. We want wetlands. We want, preservation and conservation. And so it was looking at all of that. So when I got into the Congress, I joined the Conservative Climate Caucus. I think I was like their 20th member.
Okay.
So how does that go back to, you want my background. So first and foremost, I was not born in Iowa, but I've lived in Iowa more than any place my entire life. I was born in California. My dad was enlisted Air Force, career Air Force. My mom had a GED. She actually didn't go to college. My parents valued college education and wanted that for their kids. There were 8 of us. I was the 4th of the 8.
Wow.
And so we moved all over, but mostly I was raised in Southeast Texas, outside of San Antonio. And so what we saw there was cotton and maize. Interestingly enough, if anybody's seen the movie Walk the Line, the Johnny Cash movie, my growing up was very much like that. Dirt roads, walking along roads with rows of crops on either side of you. And yes, we were barefoot. So I grew up in Southeast Texas, and then wherever my father would get stationed. When I was 15, I was burned in a kitchen fire and decided I wanted to become a doctor. At that point in time, no one in my family had ever gone to college. My parents were a little bit dismissive, I would say. Only, as a young person, you think they don't think you can do it. But for them, they just didn't see how someone who was an enlisted man's daughter, both parents working, the fourth of 8 kids. My 2 older brothers finished high school and went into the military. One in the Green Beret, one to Vietnam. My older sister wanted to get married and have kids. So here was, and I actually was the runt of the family, the most petite. Here was the runt who says she's going to be a doctor. They just didn't know what to do with that.
That's
And
awesome.
so for me, that negativity, or I just was going to show my parents that I could do what it was I planned to do. So I left home at 16. I started working at a Dairy Queen, enrolled in junior college at 16. And I just said, I'm going to figure out a pathway to get myself to medical school, and thought if I went into nursing, I could work at night because it was a career field that was similar. You could work at night. So I started junior college to get a degree in nursing, enlisted in the Army at age 18, ended up getting a degree in nursing that got promoted to lieutenant, and just kept working at night, going to school until eventually I got a master's in education. They felt sorry for me and let me in med school. And then I came to Iowa to do my residency in ophthalmology. So that is how I ended up in Iowa. But
That's
along the way, we lived in places, we planted gardens, the number of weeds I had to pick and rocks that I had to move in order to get planting ground was monumental. But my parents always grew, always gardened, and my mother was just a consummate green thumb. She could grow anything, propagate anything. And then my father, when we found his yearbook from high school, he grew up in California. Twice his property was taken by eminent domain, his father's property, for Interstate 5. So Interstate 5, as it goes around Los Angeles, where Santa Susana, Simi Valley, San Fernando Valley is, that used to be my grandfather's walnut and orange groves. And so my father in his yearbook said he wanted to be a farmer. So when he finished the military, he goes to college, gets a degree in accounting, finance and accounting, graduates the top of his class, and then finds out they want him to go get 6 more months to get a CPA. And he says, I'm not doing that. So he goes to work doing sheet metal welding with Brown and Root, and buys a farm in De Leon, Texas. So finally had a farm, and he grew peanuts and he grew watermelons.
awesome.
And then when he retired from that, his farm was actually wiped out by a tornado. And he and my mom moved to Oklahoma, where my mom was from. And then he grew peaches, and he would sell peaches by the roadside. And the bad thing about my father dying is that everybody in Iowa wanted to know when I was going to bring peaches, and we didn't have peaches anymore because they require a lot of work. But that's my ag experience. I love rural Iowa. I love where I live. I can tell you, I have never ceased to be impressed, amazed, and joyful when I travel Iowa. I love seeing every season we have here, except not the winter as much now as when I was younger, especially when there's a blizzard. But love watching you all when you're out in the fields planting, when you're out in the fields harvesting. I've had the pleasure to drive a combine, and I can drive a straight line. So that's my only claim to fame, except it's hard for me to get up and get down.
And some steady doctor hands too. So
that's right. And so, yes, I did actually practice as a doctor, as an ophthalmologist. So I did cataract surgery, LASIK, glaucoma, injections for macular degeneration, and have had the privilege to help people regain sight, save sight, diagnose tumors, help kids straighten their eyes. And it's just been a very gratifying career. And when people in DC ask me if I'm having fun, I typically will say I have more fun sticking needles in people's eyes.
Versus some of the conversations you have to deal with in DC.
Yes.
Well, I mean, amazing stuff. And obviously, my observation of you, has just been whenever there's this challenge and stuff ahead of you, you're gonna bulldog through it, and you're gonna figure it out, no matter what it is. So I think that's been abundantly clear, and I think why you've been having success, against, especially at the beginning, kind of against all odds. in how we've seen your journey. So amazing, all kinds of stuff we got to dig into here, and I've got a gazillion different questions. I want to let's talk about the Conservative Climate Caucus stuff a little bit and telling our story, okay? Because I think you really hit on something here that I want to double click into. I think my observation being, obviously a lot of on conservative side, it's hey, this climate stuff, like it's a leftist talking point, and it's kind of it's not a bipartisan type of thing. We're going to dig into 45Z here, which I think has really good bipartisan support, and want to get your thoughts on that. But in the and everybody get involved in the conversation, which is what you were getting into. I think that really strikes a chord. And specifically to add some numbers, we've been helping farmers quantify their carbon intensity score.
Yeah.
According to the US Department of Energy, the typical bushel of corn in this country, or corn in this country, has a CI score of 29.1. That's the default. But we've scored over 300 million bushels of corn and found the average score to be 11.1, an 18-point reduction, almost a two-thirds reduction. And I think to your point on farmers getting a bad rap a lot of times, middle America getting a bad rap a lot of times about not necessarily caring about environment and all this stuff. No, we actually are doing a great job already. And actually, from our data, we're almost two-thirds better than what we're given credit for. We've just never been able to really tell that story before.
Exactly.
And I've never really had a reason to or any monetization opportunity in telling that story. And now it looks like we are going to have that. And we have an amazing story to tell. And so I think that's kind of my message in this of, from it doesn't matter what side of the political aisle you're on, like, hey, we have some commonalities here that we do want to, care for the environment, want to improve water quality, want to improve soil health and all this stuff. It's got to be financially viable. And I
Yes.
think it needs to be not just, it can't be all government funded. It's got to be, we all got to be in this together kind of thing. But we've got an amazing story to tell. So is that kind of
That's
what
exactly
this is
it.
about?
So, for me, it was one is that I just felt when we're not in the space, then there's this vacuum, and
Mm,
you only hear one narrative, and you don't have to believe everything in the International Panel on Climate Change. It's not why I joined the Conservative Climate Caucus. For me, I just felt that if we don't talk about it, that you only hear not one narrative, and then everybody's a climate denialist or a climate denier. And when I looked around and I looked at what farmers were doing, what ag was doing,
mm,
you just see so much progress and so much care about the environment. You're stewards of the land, we're conservationists. And like I said, we get this bad rap because we don't talk about it. As a state senator, one of the hearings, the subcommittee hearings that was the most widely attended was on the state revolving fund and purchase of land for conservation. Farmers were there. You had people from the far left and the far right were there, and it was like no one expected all of these individuals to be there. And what they were concerned about was, how we use land, habitat, wetlands, land that's set aside because number one, when there's productive ag land, you want to be able to utilize that.
yeah.
But you also, we hunt, we fish. So what happens in the water quality is very important. Your kids are growing up in a rural area too. You may be using well water. So what happens as water penetrates through the ground is important to you. How you're able to grow your crops is important to you. So I looked at that and what we were doing, and I said, if we don't talk about this, there is only one narrative. And I was also looking at how energy was made. And it's kind of normal for me as a science mind. Science is not consensus. And that's one of the things that really bothered me. And you would hear the consensus of scientists. Well, science isn't consensus. Science is a theory, a hypothesis, and then you set up a study in order to test your hypothesis. You do the study, you get the results, and then you repeat the results to validate it. That's science. And with climate, because of the length of time that you have to see results, we don't have that. So there is a consensus of scientists, but you have other scientists that may say different things. But at the same point in time, every single one of us can say that the climate has changed, the environment has changed. So I thought it's not a hard jump to say, what's my principle in this? So when I was asked by the environmental groups and some of them radical groups, if I believed in climate change, I just said that's the wrong question. The question is, how do we leave a cleaner, healthier planet for our children and grandchildren, but be able to compete economically around the globe? We're in a global economic environment. So to be able to compete economically, we need affordable, abundant, reliable, secure energy. That means we need a whole portfolio of energy. We need carbon-based fuels, liquid fuels, wind and solar, and we should be able to use the natural resources that we have in our country and our state to be able to do that. And when I went to my first, international climate summit, COP, that was in 2021, and there was a lot of pushback. No one on my team wanted me to go, and they kept telling me I couldn't go. And I kept telling them I was going to go. And finally, I just said, is your concern that you think I'm going to alienate all the Republican voters if I go? And I said, I don't think so, because let me tell you what I say. And that is, I am from a state where 50% of our energy is renewable. So that's ethanol, biodiesel, biomass, manure that creates energy, that is compressed renewable natural gas. Yeah. We didn't even start talking about biochar, even though it's not fuel, but it can be an additive. Sure. And a water purifier. I said we have wind, solar, hydropower, and we utilize what's in our state. At the time when I went to my first COP in 2021, 50% of our energy was from wind, and we're a net exporter of energy. And I said, if I don't go talk about, if I don't go to COP and I don't talk about what we're doing in an agriculture-based state, they're going to keep penalizing agriculture by saying, you can't use this fertilizer, you can't use that. And so they're going to harm all of the work that farmers have done on their own, without mandates, without emission guidelines. They have done it on their own to protect their investment in their land and their equipment and their lifestyle. And so I went, and that's what I talked about.
Yeah, that's how I talk about it to farmers too, and say, like what I was just sharing, farmers, you already have a CI score of 29.1. You can think that this is a bunch of government BS. You can think this is a bunch of hooey. Doesn't matter. You can disagree with all of it. Doesn't matter. You've already got a score. You're already part of the system. And they believe that you're a 29.1. And now we have a carrot to reduce our scores with 45Z. And if we don't get the carrot, I don't think we're going to like the alternative, because it could very easily be the stick. And right now they believe that we're at 29.1, the government at large, and that's how the models work. So yeah, we have to be able to tell this story. They're like, hey, we're doing a good job. And I think that some of this stuff, it sets up some precedent that free market systems can really take over, and there can be less reliance on government spending to get it there. But we've got to see how things progress.
Well, you said this was going to be a free-flowing conversation. So you just said something that I think is critically important, and that is markets and free markets.
Yeah.
And so I firmly believe in the Conservative Climate Caucus, one of the things that's important to us, and is one of the things that now, as the chair, John Curtis from Utah started the Conservative Climate Caucus. He's running for the state Senate in Utah. He had a very tough primary. So he asked me if I would be the chair. I thought I would take over after the election and take over January, but he wanted me to take over earlier. So as the chair of the Conservative Climate Caucus, now the chair, we want to push market-based solutions and innovation. And we think that's very important. And I think it's important to look at, they look at agriculture from the standpoint of how much energy is used, i.e., in tractors, in combines, in planters, in fertilizer, but we don't do that for wind or solar or other types of energy generation. And when you look at them from, inception, start until disposal, they're not as clean as some of the things that we're doing. So I think it's very important that what you're doing is trying to create this marketplace where agriculture is part of the solution, not part of the problem. And I think the UN finally recognized that last year when they said American agriculture has reduced emissions. That was the first time there was any admission. Everybody else wants to deny the Harvard study, but there has been a great reduction in emissions in farm practices. And you're correct. The 45Z is something that, it's the Clean Fuel production credit. And so it is a carrot, but it needs some work. And farmers are going to need help in doing it.
Yeah.
And the other alternative is what I'm very concerned about with this administration and a potential new president is that that they will use the stick in order to advance a radical environmental climate agenda, and not a practical free market scenario that also adopts innovation and all of the energy portfolio we need, because we need all of them. I don't see an environment where a carbon-based fuel goes away. And that's because energy demand, even 5 years ago, everybody around the world acknowledged energy demand was going up. They don't have a way to meet energy demand now, and that's without AI and data centers coming on board. Data centers could take almost as much electricity it takes to power Des Moines.
Wow. Yeah, and especially as we're looking at, whether it be plug-in, hybrids or electric vehicles and stuff, or all the balance of all this, the stick, we're not even ready for the stick. Like systems aren't there yet, even if they wanted to do that. Like it would do way more harm and
That's
not
correct.
actually get something accomplished. So I think you got to be able to let the carrot kind of stay out there. And yeah, I mean, I think what's amazing about this and being able to tell our story is a lot of farms like mine, a lot of the farmers that are listening to this, we're actually carbon negative. And a lot of these other industries, they can't do that, right? Like my CI score last year was a negative 4.1. We'll see what it ends up being this year based on yield as part of the factor. But these other industries, they can't do that. And I think you're exactly right that as we're talking about policy and talking about tailpipe emissions and regulation stuff, you got to look at the whole thing. And a lot of times, they don't really factor in how is
Well, when
that.
you were saying the stick, I'm thinking EPA and tailpipe emissions rules. So it's like
Yeah.
you're reading my mind and
Yeah,
shutting.
like how is that battery actually factored in and the emissions from getting that there and how it was produced and the labor that
Exactly.
went into it and stuff. And then, where did the energy actually come from? Yeah, there's gonna be more and more of it being renewable, but that windmill itself, it has a carbon footprint to it as well. Like you
As a
can't
carbon,
just
how much cement goes into securing that
yeah.
windmill?
And not that, like, I mean, I think we're in alignment that we gotta have all the options. We gotta have all these different things. And yeah, as we think about the long term, okay, sure, you're gonna have more electric vehicles and stuff. That's fine. Um, but as we look at sustainable aviation fuel and marine and
Yes.
heavy equipment, like there's gonna be liquid fuels for a long, long time here. And in order to make those markets work, we gotta have low carbon liquid fuels. And that's where, I think the conversation we're trying to push is hey, in order to create low carbon ethanol and low carbon soybean oil that can be part of these supply chains, you got to have all the options on the table there too. Whether that be carbon capture in the pipelines, whether that be more renewable energy to reduce scope two, but also on the farm and factoring in that on farm component. And I think that's where 45Z is really the first thing that
Yeah.
actually enables that to happen. And I do want to double tap into that. And of course, we're helping a lot of farmers figure out 45Z, right? We've scored hundreds of millions of bushels, way more than anybody else. We have a verification process set up where we're actually helping farmers get verified, not just hearsay, but actually verified carbon intensity certificates. But any chatter on 45Z and some of the rules, and we know that there's conversations going on between the IRS and the ethanol plants. And I think it's not necessarily anything that's in Congress's hands, but I don't know. I guess your thoughts on that or anything that you're hearing about when it comes to 45Z, and is there anything we can do?
So, I think the most important thing is setting up the rules around the tax credits and doing that at a time when there's an election coming up and we don't know what's going to happen with the administration,
Right.
Or who's going to be in charge of the administration. So part of it is trying to work currently right now with the IRS, with the Department of Agriculture, with Secretary Vilsack in promulgating the rules, getting the rules made. And the rules in such a fashion that farmers can actually meet the guidance, because it makes no sense to have the guidance if you're unable to do it, or the input cost is so great, or the productivity is so low that you're not able to meet them or to achieve the credit. So how do we send that? That also goes the whole 45s and then some of the 40s as well.
Yeah, yeah,
And those numbers are just where it is in the tax code.
yeah,
And so when it comes to the 45Z, the how the credit is, how we factor it, how they measure it, those rules have to be set apart.
right.
And we need, for the 45s, a menu of options that farmers can do so that
Yeah,
they have a menu of options. If they do two of the three, then they can meet that credit. I'm
yeah.
glad you mentioned the carbon sequestration, the pipeline. So
Mhm.
some of these credits, as you know, are for or more appropriate for soy, some are more appropriate for ethanol. So
Sure.
we need all of them. And if
Yeah.
you recall, last year we had the debt limit. You had some freshman legislators. I mean, they had just been reelected to their second terms in Congress. They had only finished one term. Actually, had to go up against their speaker to preserve these tax credits because we had members in the House in the Freedom Caucus who wanted to get rid of all the IRA tax credits. Now, the IRA itself, it's touted as a bipartisan bill. It wasn't. Yes, there were some Republicans who voted for it, but the majority did not, and that's because the bill had 87,000 IRS agents, which we don't want. We don't want the audits. They're going to affect 70. Even the Washington Post said they would affect 75% of people making under 200,000 a year. 50% would affect people making under 75,000 a year. It also had things on Medicare, Medicare Part D, on drugs. So there's a whole lot of stuff in addition to the energy tax credits.
Yep.
Had the Democrats wanted to work with Republicans and had gone through the regular committee process where members were allowed to offer amendments, they were allowed to discuss the tax credits, there would have been support, I believe, for certain tax credits, not for all of them, but certainly for some of them.
Sure.
And so one of the things that happened in the debt limit last year was the four Iowans got together. They got with other ag state representatives, and we went to talk to leadership, and we said, we're not going to vote on a debt limit increase if removing these tax credits is in there. And what we were told was that, well, it's okay if they're in there because the Senate's going to take them out anyhow, so you don't have to worry about it. Well, my comment to the speaker was, well, you can tell the Freedom Caucus if the Senate's going to take them out anyhow, then they don't need to be in there. So just take them out. So we actually negotiated. We didn't talk to media. We didn't talk to anybody. We just held our ground. We put Randy Feenstra as our representative to talk for us. None of us talked that week to the media. We came back to Washington, D.C., met again with the speaker, and ultimately the speaker talked with other members of Congress, made some adjustments, and the debt limit went through without having these tax credits in there on the chopping block. Yeah. And that's because you all are already doing it. You're already implementing policies. You're already making changes in your practice in order to meet the requirements. People have already purchased land, leased land. There's already a lot of investment that's gone into these tax credits, even with the rules not being fully set out. So I think the same thing is going to happen now. Maybe I'm just the eternal optimist. My children say I like to make lemonade out of lemons. So, I think regardless of who the president is, I think that we're going to be able to work with whoever the president and whatever administration is there on the tax credits. Yeah. And not all of them. As the Conservative Climate Caucus, what we're doing now, I'm looking through, and my staff are looking through all of the tax credits in the IRA, all of the energy credits, and then going through which ones we would be likely to support and which ones we would not support. Myself and then Representative Andrew Garbarino, he is the chair or the co-chair of the Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus that works with industry. We sent a letter to Speaker Johnson. We did not leak it to the press. We didn't send it to the press, but we sent a letter to Speaker Johnson saying we would like to have a conversation about the energy credits in the IRA. We just want to have a conversation. We didn't advocate for specific credits. Obviously, the 45s and the 40s are very important to us. The nuclear tax credits are important. So there are tax credits that are important to certain states and red states. And we think we need to have a conversation before they start going through this pathway to get rid of all the IRA tax credits.
Yeah, I mean, so quick follow up on that is that we kind of like these ones. We don't necessarily like these ones. Does that end up getting published in public or not necessarily?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
It depends upon who leaks the conversation.
Yeah.
If you send a letter to an agency, so if I were to send a letter to the IRS, or to EPA or Secretary of Ag,
Yeah.
then that letter would be public. So the letter we sent to Speaker Johnson, we did not make public. We sent it to Speaker Johnson, but it was publicized. And, unfortunately, President Biden came and said, well, they saw the light. There was lots of reasons for us not to like the IRA.
For sure.
And we've had Representative Chip Roy put out a note and said, they all voted against this, but now they want to save it. Well, we voted against the entire bill.
Yeah.
We weren't given an opportunity to vote on a bill that, the Democrats piled it all together, did it through budget reconciliation. We were never allowed to vote individually on parts of the IRA.
Well, and that kind of seems like a trend too, right? In DC,
Yeah,
is just hey, you just kind of lump everything together and you get little bits and pieces tied in on your bill, and then you just kind of by the time you're said and done, it's tens of thousands of pages and nobody really even hardly knows what's in it. But I think the 45Z piece at least, and awesome to hear you say, hey, whoever it's going to be come November, come January, like we can probably work with them on either side. I think is really refreshing, especially for me to hear that. But hopefully for everyone else here on too. And my take on 45Z is like, hey, this checks a lot of boxes for both sides. Yeah, we're going to decarbonize. It's a win for the Inflation Reduction Act, and you get more low carbon energy
yes,
and lower the carbon footprint of ag and do this environmental stuff. That's great. But then also we keep liquid fuels alive. This is great for middle America. We're talking huge dollars. And set things up for longer term opportunities with sustainable aviation fuel or with renewable diesel or some of these other,
correct.
emerging markets. So it really, I think, has huge wins on both sides. And I think that's why we got so much support behind it too. It's like, wow, this could really work. But to your point, we need IRS rules to be not, to allow for a lot of different practices to be included. And that's why our take is just, hey, use the GREET model and the feedstock calculator. It's already out there today. It's not perfect, but it's the best that we have. And we can always improve it later as we go in future renditions of this. But like, gosh, let's just get the ball rolling and get things off the ground. So that way we can take those investments further and we really can ramp this up. And I think my last kind of point on that being we're going to be harvesting here in Southeast
Yes,
Iowa in the coming couple weeks. I mean, or sooner. There's going to be combines rolling here soon. And that means there's going to be fall decisions being made and implemented when it comes
yes,
to cover crops and fertilizer and manure and tillage. And having clarity now allows us to make those decisions here this fall that's going to impact our grains carbon footprint next year.
correct.
And so we're missing a huge opportunity to really jumpstart this process if we don't get the rules soon. And now I don't know if you have a hot take on it, but our sentiment and what we heard from Secretary Vilsack at a conference a couple of weeks ago is maybe some preliminary rules later this year, but then there's a 60-day comment period, and then they've got to ingest those rules and stuff. So, I mean, is there any hope? And I don't know, maybe this is speculation on your side, you don't want to speak to it, but do you think there's any hope that there could be some initial preliminary stuff out this year or and then have that 60-day comment period start? Or is it basically with election coming up, pretty much the rest of the year in DC is shot?
Well, it's a great question because we still, speaking of the rest of the year, we have 3 more weeks before the election. So when we go back into September, we have 3 weeks to try to get stuff passed. And one of the big things we haven't passed is the Farm Bill.
Yeah.
Um,
I was gonna pivot into that too.
so, I think ultimately what's going to happen is that Senator Grassley was right. And that just tells you that age and wisdom go together when it's Senator Grassley, maybe not everybody else. But he said last year he thought that we probably weren't going to get the Farm Bill. I was like not going to diss on the House, and we're going to get the Farm Bill done.
Yeah.
But could be that Senator Grassley is right, and we get another extension. Now that's bad. Continuing resolutions, continuing things, not having, you all need the stability, of a 5-year reauthorization, not this 1-year extension, 1-year extension. We need to get our job done. It's a heavy lift, but we need to get our job done.
I think
And
that's
so
kind
from
of a
that,
sentiment at this point, right? It's like, just get it done. And I definitely understand. I think my understanding what's kind of holding it up is the SNAP piece is now 84%
yep,
and the farm bill is 16%. Like, I mean, it's always the mantra of keep the farm in the farm bill, right? But now the farm is 16% of the
right.
farm bill and
And
continue
what,
to get
and
squeezed,
and the
squeezed and
other side
squeezed.
will argue that, well, nutrition, that's related, that's ag, and
Yeah.
so they're hand in hand. And you know as well as I do that that's not exactly true. We also have, the other things on the horizon. I think right now, and the reason why I think both administrations, I'm not going to. I certainly have a preference of who I want to get elected,
Yeah.
so I have a preference of my presidential candidate. But I think even that person, regardless of what public comments have been said, I think is a person that we can work with. On the other hand, I have a lot of concerns that the IRA may be kept, but you've got the EPA tailpipe emission rule. You have the power plant rule. Those things are very harmful. The preference for wind and solar, and wind taking over and our solar taking over, productive farmland. Very concerned about that. And so ISU has a great project that they're doing on planting and growing crops underneath
Mhm.
solar panels.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't able to go out and see their pilot field. But when we had our energy tour,
Yeah.
it was one of the things that we wanted to do. We went up to Iowa State to talk to Dr. Brown and the Bioeconomics Institute, and then to the Biochar Institute as well too. So, I do think that there is the probability that we can preserve these credits regardless of who is president, even though I have my preferences on who's president. But
Yeah.
we right now have corn that's under 4.
Yeah.
We have soy that's under 10. That's extraordinarily problematic for you all.
Yeah.
And having some rules come out in regards to this will be very helpful.
Yeah,
Number one.
that's
And
a
then,
key sentiment I think right now, Congresswoman, is if we don't get these rules out
yeah,
and have them be pro farmer and pro ag, meaning use the GREET model, actually make sure that the full, dollar figures get deployed out there, just the way that's laid out in the Inflation Reduction Act, like it seems to me like the actual rules that were written and the tools we have, it's fairly straightforward. If we don't get it done the right way, ag is going to be in a world of hurt for the
yes,
years to
that,
come
and
and
we
not
have,
getting better. Like I don't see where it gets better
yeah, and our
anytime soon.
deficit from ag is going up.
Yeah.
So I think those are things that are very significant headwinds, and that would be to me, one of the persuasive arguments we could make to if there is a change in administration, so an administration that did not put forward the IRA,
Yeah.
that's one of the arguments I would make in order to preserve these tax credits.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think if Trump, is in there, I think that it's like, hey, here is some, US renewable energy stuff and prop up that US energy sovereignty, but also this is, great for middle America and
well, his slogan
and
is,
the economic
make
driver
America
that's tax
great.
credits, right? It's tax credits. It's still, of course, all taxpayer dollars at the end of the day, but at least it's not direct government
Right.
spending have to go out and implement this. And I think there are systems in place too that it doesn't take a lot of big government to oversee and implement this as well, which is great.
Correct. It's tax credits, which
Tax
typically we
credits.
favor.
Yep.
Number one. Number two, he wants homegrown energy.
Yeah.
There's nothing more homegrown than corn and soy that's used for energy.
Yeah.
And the third thing is, and I like to point this out to to the environmentalists. If you think that not allowing the U.S. to grow and be as productive as it is on the agricultural side, if you think that's going to reduce ethanol from being used as a fuel, Brazil will cut down more rainforests to produce more corn, to grow
Yeah.
more corn. And China is helping them with building out infrastructure. So A comment you had made early on is the carbon sequestration pipeline, and some people are misinterpreting what I said. My grandfather's farm was taken by eminent domain. So eminent domain, in my mind, when a presidential or vice presidential candidate was asked, a couple of decades ago, what were two Supreme Court decisions that they thought were important? The first one I'm thinking of is Kelo versus Connecticut, eminent domain. Second, Heller versus DC on the Second Amendment. So very importantly, you have to understand, why is anybody thinking about doing carbon sequestration? What's the purpose for that? And as you already alluded, it's to lower the carbon intensity score. Brazil has 2 growing seasons. So Brazil's ethanol is already it has a lower carbon intensity score than US. So when you have airlines all across the world looking for a low carbon fuel, and as ethanol meets those requirements, then they're going to go to Brazilian ethanol because the carbon intensity score is lower and are negative. So to your point, back to the beginning of this conversation, you already have a low carbon intensity score. What can you do to make the carbon intensity score lower? Because we need to expand markets. We have an administration, and this, I think, would be true if it's a continuation of the current administration, trade. They have done nothing on trade in 4 years. Trade is extraordinarily important to our ag economy. And so does that mean we have 4 more years of not negotiating any trade agreements? We need to have trade agreements, and we need trade agreements in Asia. We have Vietnam wants our ethanol. I talked to them about E5 when I was there, as well as soy, corn gluten meal, corn, the amount of pesticide. So I'm talking to Vietnam about ag stuff and E5 when I'm over in Vietnam, and talking to their Minister of Environment and their trade.
That's, I think, spot on. We got to be able to get some of these, whether it be our raw commodities or value-added products, being able to, we've got to be able to have trade if we want these markets to actually get better demand. And a lot of that ends up being trade. Let's hit on a couple of these questions, because really good stuff. My buddy Bob, he's over in Nebraska. I've hit on most of his stuff, but what about this Project 2025? Any take on that? And does that throw a wrench into some of this conversation around 45Z? I know Trump, it sounds like Trump, I don't know where he's at on Project 2025, but any hot take on your side?
So the hot take on my side is that I don't think most of the Congress people knew what the heck Project 2025 was. So it's like, what the Democrats do to, attack Republicans and to make people scared that they're going to do something. But, the Democrats have think tanks too. And think tanks are just that. They analyze things, they look at things, and then they come up with possible scenarios. We've already had 2 members of Congress, in Representative Chip Roy from Texas and Representative Scott Perry from Pennsylvania, who have on several occasions put forward amendments to end the renewable fuel standard. And they'll say, well, the government shouldn't be in the marketplace. Well, the government is already in the marketplace. We already saw what happened to the price of corn when President Obama didn't meet the RVO standards. The price of corn went from 12 to 8, and now the price of corn is down under 4. And so it's extraordinarily problematic to try to, remove a renewable fuel standard when, farmers last year, they all told me that they were going to be okay in 2024, but they didn't know after that. So we're now in that scenario. So no farmer wants to, farmers are individuals, they're independent, they're hard workers, they do multiple jobs. No farmer wants a government handout. And we're not talking about a government handout. We're trying to, position American agriculture to be in the best place possible to be able to export around the world and meet the needs both for food and fuel here in the United States and internationally.
Well, and it's more enabling policy and stuff, right? And the renewable fuel standard, it's still a big deal, especially when it comes to ethanol and stuff, but even bigger on the soybean side of things. That's what this questionnaire is about. I'm like knocking down some of their volumes, and like what you were just alluding to that happened under Obama. We've got the same kind of things now, where those RVOs, which is the volume obligations, that they're really low right now. And we're seeing that reflected in the price, and we're seeing crush plants and stuff shut down. We're seeing investment draw back on that. And the question there being, hey, if we're going to do sustainable aviation fuel, we got to have all these options on the table and
Correct.
be going full speed ahead. Um,
And
so
we
it
almost
seems like
got,
there's a disconnect there, you know?
yeah, we almost got the clean fuel parodies, the Fuel Parodies Act. I mean, it was coming up for consideration. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get it, but it had the GREET model. And the whole
Mhm.
point of that is, why wouldn't farmers, regardless if it's corn, regardless if it's soy, why wouldn't you want the GREET model? Why wouldn't you want a model that the Department of Energy has already established, rather than allowing the EPA to do whatever it wants, whenever it wants?
Yeah.
So we're again trying, we've got legislation that's only with the GREET model, trying to get
Yeah.
that through.
That's
So you
great.
have that certainty of having a specific formula that the formula exists. And there are ways to get the carbon intensity score down on soy. I don't know them as well, but I
Yep.
do think it's something that the work that you're doing, the help that you give to farmers to do this, is critical for us as we move forward.
Yeah, I know them extremely well. How you can lower the CI score on soybeans is you got to be no-tilling and using cover crops. Those are really the only two drivers that lower the CI score on soybeans today. And in doing that, you can lower the CI score here in Southeast Iowa by about 60 CI points. Incredible reduction.
I think
And
that was the field you showed us.
and you've seen that on my farm. You came out during our topsoil summit this year, which has been amazing. Your third one they've come to. It's been so awesome. And but yeah, you've seen it firsthand. Like carbon negative, like two pretty extreme, like a negative 20 CI score on those soybeans. On corn, you can reduce it with lots of different options, including no-tilling, cover cropping, but also improving your fertilizer management, utilizing nutrient stabilizers and such, utilizing manures, reducing your fuel inputs and such. There's lots of ways that you can do it on corn. Now, a quick little tidbit for you too. On there, one of the pieces where I could see a little bit of skepticism on the GREET model is it doesn't work for every county in the country. It's very good for a lot of the I states and good for you and my region here, but there are different counties as we get further outside the Corn Belt where the SOC or the soil organic carbon component isn't factored in. So it gives really poor scores in certain areas just because the GREET model is it was never really designed for multi-billion dollar tax credits. It's an academic tool. And now that's one of the pieces that is needed is some investment in that
Okay.
tool to make it work for farmers or for wherever they're growing corn and soybeans. Then it likely also needs and further expansion of different crops and stuff too. Obviously, it's great for us here, of corn and soybean area, but as we think about other winter oilseed crops and canolas and stuff for sustainable aviation fuel, for renewable diesel, it's gonna need to be extended. But our take is like, hey, it's good enough for now for 45Z, get it launched. You're gonna continue to improve the model over time, but like don't sacrifice waiting for perfection when you've got it solid today
Yeah.
and let's get the ball rolling. So just a couple of quick hot takes for you. Okay, lots of other good questions I want to get to. You've brought up biochar a couple times. Quick status on the biochar research bill, if you're familiar with that, and any status on that.
Well, so the biochar research bill and setting up a biochar research institute at Iowa State University is my bill. I am enamored with biochar. I had no idea that anybody else knew anything about it. And that actually came from a conversation with Harry Stein. So I was just meeting
Yeah.
with Harry Stein. We're talking. He tells me about it. I actually did some research, and he told me when we did a roundtable at the Pyrolyzer in Adele. And he told me that he had never met a politician who said they liked something and then actually found out that they really did. They weren't just blowing smoke. That's
Yeah.
not his words. Those are my words. But, and I talked about it when I went to my first COP in 2021. And then I found out that the now chair of natural resources, Bruce Westerman, who is a forester, he did his master's in forestry at Yale. And he's an engineer by trade, and he has the Trillion Trees Act, but that he's a huge advocate of biochar. So, I mean, it's just an amazing product. And I think we can make it economically viable. There's ways to do it. And Iowa State is working on a pyrolyzer. I think that's going to be smaller and much more
Mhm.
adaptable and portable. But I really think that this gives us another opportunity. You mentioned earlier about having different products and market values. So this is just another, I think, another product that can be made from the crops that we utilize. And
Yeah.
it's something that can be easy. So you've got the biogas, you've got the bio oil, you've got the biochar
Yeah.
as a food. It can be till, no till.
Mhm.
You can put it into the soil, marginal soil, water
Yeah.
purification, biome, reduce the amount of fertilizer, pesticide, fungicide. I mean, it has a multiplicity of use, in addition to which that
Yeah.
residue, the stover, can be any organic material, can be used in a pyrolyzer to create biochar, biogas, bio-oil, which then can go into asphalt. I mean, the uses are
Yeah.
astronomical.
I'm seeing a ton of company. I get hit up probably weekly by different biochar companies and stuff trying to get in on all this. I definitely see a lot of the agronomic benefits, so especially in weaker soils. So like
Yeah,
in a lot of our Iowa soils, we already have a lot of carbon. Maybe there's some weaker soils in different areas. Of course, it can still help, but you're going to get the most bang for your buck in weaker, sandier soils and such.
correct.
But I mean, the amount of interest in it is just
And what we
tremendous.
didn't mention is probably most importantly, from the Conservative Climate Caucus viewpoint, is that it's the best way to sequester carbon.
Yeah.
So
Well, and
it's for
sequester
thousands of
sequester a
years.
lot of carbon and hold it for a long, long time because it's
Correct.
very stable, right? It's basically like
Charcoal.
charcoal. And and we've experimented with a little bit here in on our farm and some of the farms we've worked with around here. Definitely bullish on it long term. Okay, a couple other things. We're running out of time. I knew we would, and it's
I'll try and
amazing.
talk
Got
less.
you for a full hour. Obviously, you and I could talk on this stuff for a long time. Okay, so actually, Dad's question here: likelihood of some of these biofuel tax credits being for domestic feedstocks versus international feedstocks, and the question on that.
That's a great question, and there's been a letter circulating that the tax credits only be used. So we're exploring that letter. We're already on a letter with Representative Feenstra and some other individuals. I think it's something that we have to be, number one, we have to look at. Certainly, we want to enhance domestic production. We want to support domestic production, but we also have to be careful. There is always this unintended consequence that you don't know about. But yes, preferentially, we want them. There are letters circulating out there of the tax credits. I think part of it is, let's get the rules written, and the rules written in a favorable way, or say we're not going to write the rules
Yeah,
in time and then let the new administration write the rules. Why do I have hope that the rules are going to be written? Because it's really important to this administration. The IRA was their legacy piece.
yeah,
And right now, because they're trying to shovel the money out the door, because
yeah,
most of the money hasn't gone out the door. They're worried it's going to be clawed back if there is a change in the administration, a
yeah,
change in the party in power. And this is their crowning achievement.
yeah,
And so I think that we have some leverage in trying to get that support for some of these things. And as I said, the 45s are an area where I think that there's tremendous bipartisan support, especially in the Biofuels Caucus, which is bipartisan.
yeah. No, I love it. Yeah, and hopefully to your point, like, hey, get the rules out or let us know they're not going to come. Just be open and transparent so that we can plan and pivot accordingly, So, well, a lot of really good stuff here. We kind of hit on a couple of these things, but extension of the current farm bill. I think you were talking about mostly looking at what Senator Grassley is talking, and it sounds like your take would be probably like don't bet on it being done here
I
this
think, we
go
thought it was
around.
going to be last year, and then GT Thompson thought we would have it done June. Then it was July.
Yeah,
And then in July, I mean, we're trying to pass 12 single subject appropriation bills, single department appropriation bills. We've gotten 6 of them done. We're not going to get 6 done in the next 3 weeks. We only have 3 weeks when we go back in, because August is a recessed work period as well. And so, I'm looking at what we've achieved this year, and I'm going, we're not going to get 6 appropriations bills done and a farm bill done. So we're going to have a continuing resolution. That's going to take at least a week of time. So then can we get a farm bill done in there? I don't think so.
Yeah.
So I think the farm bill is going to be extended, not great. It's like continuing resolutions aren't great for national defense either. Two places where continuing resolutions are bad. Aviation was one of them. We finally got the FAA reauthorized, but farm bill, ag and military. And so there's a lot of things that we have to heavy lift that we have to get done. I think we're going to have a continuing resolution. The length of that, whether it's going to be until after the election and we do something in the lame duck, whether it's until January or a full year. And I think the farm bill is going to be extended. That may be better, but we don't know which way the administration is going to go. A Republican administration may be more ag heavy, so maybe we get 17 or 18% rather than 16%.
Yeah.
But I think it's unfortunate that we didn't get it done. I'm with Senator Grassley on this. I was very hopeful all year, but when we didn't get it introduced in July, that to me said we're going to be out August. We've got 3 weeks in September, and we got a lot of stuff to do, and I just don't see us getting it done. I hope they prove me wrong.
I'm with you. That's why I keep saying on 45Z too. I don't think it's going to happen, and I hope I'm pleasantly surprised if it does.
Yeah.
Okay, last question here. Amy, she's asked about the GREET model and will the bar change? Amy, I think it could later on, but not anytime soon. They'll just get it out, and in the future, it could be a moving target. Great.
I think we just need to get it out. We need a consistent formula that we're working off of. Yeah. People can adapt if they know what the target is. What we don't want is what the federal government continually does, and that is they continually change the target.
Yeah.
Let's stop changing the target. It's like the RVOs. RVOs, knowing that we've got sustainable aviation and marine fuel, that we want low carbon fuels for those two areas of transportation, the RVOs should be going up because demand is there. Demand is there for liquid fuels, low base carbon fuels. Demand is there. So the RVO should go up. To me, that signals that the EPA, it wants to have all the transportation sector to be electric. And so that way we don't need to expand RVOs because you'll have enough demand to meet aviation and marine.
Last quick question, because this comes up a variety of times. So likelihood of 45Z changes being included in whatever that Congress does with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act in 2025. And this has come up a couple different times. And so any speculation there on what the tax cut
I think one of the best things that we were able to do was that the Ways and Means did a hearing in Iowa at the Iowa State Fair. Mm-hmm. And a lot of this was focused on the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. Iowans gave testimony. We had farmers give testimony. They brought up 45Z. So I've talked with both Budget Chair Jody Arrington from Texas, as well as Ways and Means Chair Jason Smith from Missouri, just south of us. But the fact that we did that hearing here, and I think we have been able to really push this issue and push the understanding of these tax credits. Yeah. So could they be in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act? It's a possibility that they could be. I know that so we have two Iowans on Ways and Means, and that's Representative Randy Feenstra and Representative Zach Nunn. So two Iowans are on that committee. And I know you have listeners that are from different states. But I would say, yes, contact them. We'll be talking with them. But I do feel better because I think, more members of Congress are understanding this issue and understanding why we went to bat for these tax cuts in the debt limit debate.
Love it. Congressman, this has been incredible. I think we hit the main boxes that we want to hit, which has been awesome. Really appreciate you taking the time. And I
appreciate your taking the time and your listeners taking the time to educate me. As I said, one of these days I'm going to be able to take the full day and spend with you. It's a learning opportunity for me. We make better legislators and Congress people if we learn what the issues are. Yeah. And we learn how to address the issues. So I think I've learned more than I've imparted, and I probably should listen more and talk less.
No, but I think you do a really good job of that, and kudos to you. And that's why we've been able to build a nice relationship here over the years of you actually do care very clearly and actually are being smart about like educating yourself also and being humble and understanding you don't know all of the nitty gritty of all this stuff, but you know how to ask questions and how to educate yourself to make the right decision. So been amazing. Maybe we'll see you again here sometime soon. And but anyway, we'll let things go. I know we're out of time, but it's been awesome. You're
That's
the
been
best.
great. Thanks so much.
We'll talk to you soon. Thanks everybody for hanging out.
That was a fast hour, I'm going to tell you.
That was fast.
That was
Thanks
fast.
everybody.
All right.
We'll
Thank you
talk
all
to you
very
later.
much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.